Hello and welcome to Hot Pursuit, part of Ahval series, video and podcast series. Today, my guest is joining me from Berlin, Mr. Marc Pierini, former ambassador of EU in Ankara and currently senior researcher with Carnegie Europe. Welcome, Marc. Good to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
As we speak, of course, a new chapter is being written in history. Formally, Sweden and Finland are this afternoon, as we speak, on 29th of June, invited as NATO members. After a rather dramatic night, I would say, before, when Turkey, which had unexpectedly raised the issue of blocking the membership, again, unexpectedly, quite rapidly, deblocked its veto. And with the help of or with the backing of a memorandum of understanding, text that Turkish president had required in the form of written guarantees for Turkey's, what he called Turkey's security concerns. The text is not too short. There are some details there. As a colleague of mine from Sweden said, there are some devils in the details, perhaps. I would like to hear first your reading of the critical MOU. How do you read into that?
Well, the first comment is obviously that NATO will now be able to answer in a major way this horrendous invasion of Ukraine by Russia. The lasting opposition to NATO's enlargement would have been a catastrophe, would have played in the hands of the Kremlin, obviously, and obviously, this is a major crisis across Europe, something we haven't seen in more than 70 years, 70. So we have avoided this. Now, the issue is, how is this memorandum going to be implemented? I think from my standpoint, there are a couple of issues, irrespective of Turkey's requirements on security. I think what cannot be changed is the democratic nature of the government of Sweden, the government of Finland. Therefore, if there is a change in the laws, if there is a more thorough investigation of requested extraditions, I think we all have to expect, including in Turkey, that this will be done according to the law of the land. Otherwise, both Finland and Sweden would be in big trouble with the rest of NATO and with the rest of the EU. So that's the first observation. Secondly, the fact that there is a reference at the end of paragraph 8 of the memorandum to participation of Turkey and other non-EU countries to security cooperation mechanisms within the EU. Well, that is a pro forma commitment of Turkey, Finland, and Sweden to work together to facilitate participation of Turkey and other non-EU countries in these mechanisms. But of course, these mechanisms will accept new members, non-EU members, according to their own procedures as well. So it is not like Turkey suddenly changed the rules of the game, the law of the land in Finland, Sweden, or the EU. These rules will remain, and hopefully a genuine cooperation can take place. That, I don't know, time will tell. Meanwhile, what is most important from my point of view is that the ratification processes for Finland and Sweden accession to NATO go as smoothly as possible. And I think this is the political commitment of Turkey, as I read it.
There are sort of opposing, some clashing, some conflicting conclusions about who won, who came out as a winner. Of course, overwhelmingly pro-government Turkish media, which is about 90% of the Turkish media sector, is unanimous in concluding that this was a big win for Erdogan and for Turkey. While, of course, the NATO circles, it's quite obvious that the winner is NATO, because at the end, two very important countries in terms of politics, military power, etc., have been able to, have been cleared way into the structure. And the third, of course, there are lots of criticism, especially in Sweden, about the handling of the government, by the government of this issue, from the opposition, from the Kurdish, rather big minority there, and even from the Social Democratic Party, there are now raised voices. So it is a big question, actually. If we have to speak about a winner, who won, in your opinion?
Well, I'll start by saying who lost. Who lost is Russia, because by provoking an invasion and obviously going against NATO and going against the EU, as has been the case for years, but this time in a very violent way, I think Moscow expected disunity, both in NATO and in the EU. This hasn't happened.
Dragging
Some
of the
people say
process
hasn't happened yet, but so far the resolve is there. So that is what Turkey has contributed last night, and obviously Turkey is obligated to continue to contribute to this reinforcement of NATO by its agreement to the memorandum last night. Then inevitably, because Sweden and Finland are democratic countries, you're going to see criticisms in the parliament, criticism in the media, in the civil society, and that is the nature of the game. These two countries have taken a momentous decision to turn away from their neutrality and join NATO. This makes NATO more European, more Nordic, and this reinforces NATO with two very capable armies. They're not very big, of course, if you compare numbers of airplanes or pilots or tanks with Turkey, but it makes NATO more efficient in the north of Europe. And we know that, in particular with the Baltic states, there are explicit threats from Moscow. So this is a very big win for NATO. As I said, what we need now is that the ratification process goes very fast. Now, even if it doesn't go very fast, you already have seen joint exercises between Sweden, Finland, and NATO forces. This will now go on because politically, the accession is there. Legally, it's not there, of course. Therefore, they cannot sit in the full range of institutions of NATO for the moment. But politically, the deal has been done, and Turkey has agreed to that. So I think it reinforces NATO. One of my interrogations, if you want, is what is left within European countries, in the US as well, but in my case, I would think of EU countries. What is left of the manner in which this has been done? It has been done in a strange way in two respects. One, Turkey was always in favor of NATO's enlargement policy, so this came as a surprise. Two, NATO has a habit of dealing with divergences, litigations in a very quiet way. They talk about them in the backstage, not in public. And for whatever reasons pertaining to Turkish politics, this has been done publicly, which is perhaps even more surprising than the objection itself. But politics are politics, and all politics are local, as we know.
Everyone, there is a curiosity about one thing. Erdogan Turkish President Erdogan caught everyone by surprise by raising objections immediately when Finland and Sweden started talking about submitting their applications for membership. And also equally, again, there was a moment of surprise when he quickly, unexpectedly, when everyone was expecting dragging of the process, etc., basically cleared way for two countries last night. What, in your opinion, even Ann Linde, the Swedish foreign minister, had no idea what really happened during this 4-some-hour meeting that changed his mind. What do you think made that he changed his mind so quickly, so unexpectedly?
Well, leaders attending a summit weigh their image before it starts and what they will have to face. In the case of Turkey, it's obvious that Turkey came in that summit, one with the litigation it created itself, but also with another not so positive image, that is, although it has subscribed to all the ministerial statements by NATO in reaction to Ukraine's invasion, Turkey has not deployed aircraft, troops, tanks on the eastern flank in the reassurance operation. Okay, so Turkey is sort of halfway in and halfway out. Okay, so I think the seriousness for the whole of Europe and for Turkey of the invasion, not the seriousness in the short term, which is basically the fate of Ukraine as a state and the fate of the Ukrainians, obviously, and the tremendous suffering, but the fate of the broader situation, the consequences on trade in the Black Sea, the consequences of cereal trade worldwide, the consequences on the energy market, and so on and so forth. This is so momentous that I would imagine that somehow in Ankara, the calculation has been made that this is a time, and there are a few times like this in history, that you have to signal on which side of the fence you sit. Sitting on the fence is something that many politicians like, of course. And we can recall, many instances of European politicians not in power today, who on Turkey's accession to the EU, for example, one of our favorite subjects, well, they've been sitting on the fence. I've said, well, I will be in the negotiation, but in the end, I will say no, and this and that. That is not unusual in politics, but this time it's much bigger than, the stakes are much bigger than anything we have seen in many, many decades. So basically the fate of Europe and the fate of Europe's surroundings is at stake. This is perhaps what motivated.
So you don't think that, many of us analyzed in a way that in the end, US President Biden should have to, intervene, and he did, according to, credible reports, and he called and he said, basically, you have to agree with Sweden and Finland before you will meet me. So you don't think that may have played a role in changing Erdogan's mind?
Well, what I'm sure of is that if there was no agreement, it would have been politically extremely difficult for President Biden to sit for an hour with President Erdogan. Whether this was expressed as an explicit condition or not, I have no idea, but it would have made that particular meeting, which is a short one, by the way, because 1 hour with interpretation is half an hour, it would have made it close to impossible. What I do not see is another reward coming to Turkey from Washington, because we are in pre-midterm election period in Washington. I don't see concessions, quote unquote, as some people have commented in the media, coming from Washington. And as far as I remember, Jake Sullivan said there was nothing of that sort.
So, of course, the relations between the US and Turkey have been remained thorny, to say the least. Now, of course, the issue now we need to discuss in the coming days, of course, following the meeting between Biden and Erdogan, will be whether or not Biden will be able to deliver what Erdogan wants, which is without maybe giving up on S-400 missile systems that Erdogan had purchased, Turkey had purchased, and clearing way for F-16 purchase. But Congress is there also as a big, no block. How do you think those prospects are?
Well, you mentioned two important subjects. There is a third one. Stoltenberg has already announced a surge in the rapid reaction force, multiplication by a big factor, 40 to more than 300,000. So the first issue is whether Turkey will participate this time in the reassurance operation. That is a huge subject because it's not that you're adding 5,000 troops. No? You're adding 250, 280,000 troops to an already big operation. So that is one of the conclusions of the summit, and an obvious issue is whether Turkey will subscribe in words or in deeds to that conclusion of the summit. This is very big. Secondly, F-16, this is not really in the hands of President Biden. This is in the hands of Congress. And you can read letters from State Department to Congress in that way, or read them partially and so on. The reality is that you have mandatory sanctions, and Congress is not in favor of delivering these airplanes. So that
is there any way for Erdogan to change the Congress's mind at this stage?
Well, you can lobby and lobby and lobby, but the reality is that this is your second point. The reality is that as long as the S-400 are in Turkey, you have a no-go situation. Why? I mean, you can promise 20 times that they're not deployed, they're not operational, and that doesn't matter at all. I tell you why. Because you have to look at the S-400 issue, not from Ankara, but from Moscow, okay? What has Moscow achieved there? By delivering in July 2019 these systems, together with the technical Russian personnel, okay? And they're sitting there in hangars, okay? In Moted or whatever other airbase. By delivering these systems, you're physically preventing Turkey to acquire and deploy either Patriot missiles or Eurosan missiles, the French, Italian, okay? Which, as we know, would have been the logical decision by a NATO country, Turkey, participating in the European defense system of NATO. For a number of reasons, this was not the case, but the mere fact that the S-400s are there gets Moscow rid of the alternative. On what? On 900 kilometers of its southern border with NATO. That is, from the Georgian-Turkish border to the Turkish-Bulgarian border. Secondly, due to the sanctions promulgated by President Trump in the last few weeks of his tenure, Russia has now gotten rid of 120 F-35 aircraft, okay? 100 for the Air Force, 20 for the light aircraft carrier Anadolu. This is a massive strategic gain for Russia because all these assets, be them Patriots, Eurosam, Air Force F-35 or Navy F-35, they would have been present on its southern flank. And remember, this negotiation took place from August 2016 to July 2019, way before anybody in European or American military headquarters would even imagine that an invasion of Ukraine will take place, okay? So, it's a huge gain, and in retrospect, it's an immense benefit for Russia. So this is the way in which the military in NATO perceive the presence of S-400. And until this is resolved one way or the other, there'll be a big roadblock on the way.
Two more questions before I liberate you. One is about, of course, a big issue which is mentioned in the memorandum of understanding between three countries, is the issue of YPG, PYD, SDF, Syrian Democratic Forces, which Turkey had insisted Sweden and Finland also would join in declaring as terrorists. But as Swedish Foreign Minister Ann Linde again made it clear that we, quote unquote, we will not support them. We will not support those militia, but we will not declare them as terrorists. Yet the big question mark remains, and I would like to hear your view about this, with the possible potential incursion onto Syrian Kurdish controlled areas looming, and with the knowledge that main cooperation between SDF and the Western coalition was that they are acting like guardians of some 75,000 ISIS prisoners and their families in prisons and camps. Given that frame, how will this issue be able to be handled in this new era? Because Turkey will continue to see them as threats, as it claims, and while NATO and the West will see them as still as the guarantees to that they meet their security concerns, because ISIS is a huge security concerns, even if it is contained. So how do you see that? Well,
there are two sides to this issue. Number one, a further incursion in Syrian territory on these two stretches of the border where there are no Turkish troops so far. Well, this has been condemned in advance by the US and by Russia as well. So politically, it seems a risky operation, although, of course, the logic is the same as the previous operation, of course. Going into Ras Al Ain, Tel Abyad was according to that logic, so asking for more is under the same logic. But inevitably, it will raise tensions in the region. It will raise tensions with both sides, Moscow and NATO. That's one. Secondly, as we know, this incursion, as the others, is limited to 30 kilometers in depth. And why 30 kilometers? Because this corresponds to the M4 highway, which is actually not a highway in our parlance, but it's a road, and it's a major road in northern Syria. So it provides a sort of useful benchmark because there is road traffic there. 30 kilometers is also the range of a lot of long-range artillery from Turkey. So, okay, understandable. But the presence of, in the operation initially of US and other forces in northeastern Syria, together with SDF, YPG, is due to the fact that there are remnants of ISIL operating in the region, south of M4. There's also the Al-Hol camp. So there are reasons for Western forces, for Western governments, to be extremely vigilant in this region. And obviously, the YPG has helped with great efficiency. So when you discuss, as was discussed in the memorandum of yesterday, and will be probably appearing in the NATO summit, you discuss the security preoccupation, the threat perceptions of each member, and the collectivity, NATO collectively has to understand Turkey's threat perception. That will be the narrative of Turkey. Well, you can reverse it and say, well, Europeans and Westerners have a big worry with ISIL south of the M4 highway and all the way down to the Euphrates River in northeastern Syria. So you have a situation where the perceptions are different, and that somehow will have to be resolved. Of course, it's a much more complicated situation than what I just described from the narrow angle of ISIL, because in the equation you have Russia and the Assad regime, of course. So, until we know what kind of peace, not agreement, but movement towards a peace agreement there is, and as long as Russia, Iran, and Turkey talk about the situation in the region without including Western countries, this will remain a bone of contention.
And finally, does the Memorandum of Understanding give Ankara an upper hand in terms of monitoring certain aspects of what is desired of Finland and Sweden? And of course, that brings us to the bleeding issues like human rights and the Kurdish issue, which in the eyes of many NATO members, Turkey is problematic, especially in terms of Kurdish issue. Turkey has been seen as, for long, as the one who is unable to handle in a democratic way to tackle with this issue as much as general human rights issues and rule of law issues, etc. So there are now extradition requests or mentions, references in the text, although both Niinistö, the Finland's president, and Magdalena Andersson, the Swedish prime minister, tried to give assurances that this is all about principles and not about individuals. But it doesn't, of course, prevent many dissidents abroad in Europe, various places in Scandinavia in particular, Kurds and others, and many dissidents who are not involved at all in violent activities, etc., like Ragıp Zarakolu, for example, the publisher that you probably know in Turkey. Should they be worried about their situation after this signing of this Memorandum of Understanding, or not?
Well, let me give you a general answer. There is an underlying divergence between Turkey and the whole of Europe or the rest of NATO, which is rule of law, precisely. And, nobody in Sweden, Finland, or in Brussels or elsewhere in the EU has forgotten that there was a peace process between the government of Turkey and including President Erdogan himself giving his blessing and the PKK until July 2015, right after 7th of June 15 election, where the Kurdish origin party became the second opposition force. So there was a willingness to tackle the relationship with the Kurds of Turkey through a peace process. There was involvement of senior figures in the administration, including the head of MIT, and this was interrupted. So rule of law would dictate that at some point this peace process should resume. Okay. And the same goes with the mention of the Gülen movement. For Europeans, the Gülen movement was the ally of the AKP, winning the election in 2002, winning all the other elections all the way to December 2013, when they parted company. Okay. No judgment on my part. There are political reasons to all this, but using in a memorandum like the one yesterday, an acronym invented by the government, along acronyms that are in existence because they are the symbols chosen by the PKK, by the YPG, and so on. This is not sounding very, very normal to observers and actors in European governments. But, you know, this is politics.
So they should, to a degree, be worried, the dissidents.
Yeah, well, the one thing I think they shouldn't be worried is the fact that no government in the European Union, with perhaps one exception in Budapest, but no government, certainly in Finland and Sweden, would resist the political storm if they were performing extraditions according to rules imposed from the outside. That is just unthinkable to me.
And you see no further hurdles on the way, like bringing as text the Turkish Parliament ratification of the membership of these two countries along the way?
Well, I mean, the fact that the memorandum was approved by the president and signed by the foreign minister implies that there'll be due diligence to process the parliamentary approval. The contrary will be another big surprise and another dent in the image of Turkey. I'm hopeful that it will not happen that way, because remember, the momentous thing happening is Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the devastation that goes along with it. And the devastation could reach not just Eastern European Union member states, but Turkey as well.
Joining me from Berlin in that pursuit was Marc Pierini, former ambassador of the European Union in Ankara and currently senior researcher with Carnegie Europe. Thank you for this conversation, sir.
Thank you for having me.